He woke up in the most expensive room in the hospital and did not know his own name. A billionaire builder of a vast empire lay under white sheets with nothing inside his head but silence. For an extended period, no one came. Not his ex-wife, not his son who lived a short drive away, not his daughter who had been informed right away, not a single partner from the company that bore his name. The only person who came was a woman who had not worked for him in some time. She arrived one morning with a folding chair and a small container of food she had cooked in her own kitchen. She was his former housekeeper. She was not there for money. She was not there for a job. When a nurse asked her why she had come, she said only this: "He was kind to me once in a way that cost him something. I never forgot it." Harlan Whitaker was tall with hands that were too large for the suits he now wore and fingers that still carried calluses from a life of real work. The suits were meant to make people forget. They did not make Harlan forget. He had started young fixing other people's houses in Monroe, Georgia, for cash that he folded into small rectangles and kept in his left pocket, each bill facing the same direction. Because when you have very little, you learn to know exactly where every dollar is. The habit never left him years later, with substantial holdings in commercial real estate across the American South. Harlan Whitaker still folded his money into small rectangles and placed them in his wallet with the precision of a man who remembered what it felt like to have only one. Whitaker Development Group, numerous commercial towers, several mixed-use complexes under construction, a corporate headquarters in Midtown Atlanta with his name on the building in letters that could be read from the interstate, all built from nothing. Built by one person who had borrowed a modest sum to buy a condemned duplex on the south side of Monroe, gutted it with his own hands, rented both units, and used the rent to buy the next one. His voice in a boardroom was quiet, not soft quiet. The kind of quiet that makes a room lean forward, not because the speaker is uncertain, but because the speaker has no need to be loud. This was more unsettling than volume, and everyone who worked for him understood it. What the boardroom did not know, what the towers and the contracts and the letters on the interstate did not tell anyone, was the rest of it. He had been married to Eleanor for many years. They had divorced some time ago. The proceedings had been efficient and expensive and had left the kind of silence between two people that is worse than argument. The silence of people who have simply stopped finding each other necessary. He had two children, Brooks and Delaney. Both worked for Whitaker Development Group in positions that had been created for them rather than earned by them. Harlan knew this. He did not say it. He believed that time would do what conversation could not, that eventually they would grow into the roles the way he had grown into buildings by standing inside them long enough. He was wrong about this, but he did not know it yet, and the not knowing had become its own kind of patience. Late one night, Harlan had been sitting in his kitchen. The overhead light was off. Only the small light above the stove was on, the one that turned the kitchen into something smaller and quieter than it was during the day. Corinne Vale, who had been his housekeeper, had come downstairs for water and found him there. Something happened in that kitchen that Corinne never told anyone, and Harlan never acknowledged in daylight. It sat between them afterward, the way certain truths sit between people who understand that some things are too honest for ordinary hours. Some time later, Eleanor filed for divorce, and in the machinery of separation, Corinne was let go. Corinne Vale had been born in a small southern town, the kind of place that people describe by what it does not have rather than what it does. She had no college degree. She had started cleaning houses young, and by the time she was established, she had become the kind of housekeeper who knew what a house needed before the house knew it itself. The creak that meant a hinge was going. The silence that meant a filter needed changing. The particular quality of dust that said a room had not been entered into long. Her husband Elias had died years before from lung cancer after a relatively short illness. She had been with him for every one of those months, sleeping in a chair beside his hospital bed until the nurses stopped asking her to go home and simply brought her a blanket each night. She had one son, Kieran, living in Houston. He called every Sunday. He always said, "Mama, come live with me." She always said, "I have things here." She never specified what the things were. Kieran had stopped asking. She had worked for the Whittaker household before she was let go. She had not been fired by Harlan. She had been fired by Eleanor, who in the weeks following the divorce filing had dismissed every member of the household staff in what appeared to be an act of eraser rather than economy. Corinne had received the call one day. She had thanked Eleanor for the years. She had packed her cleaning supplies into a plastic bin, placed it in the trunk of her car, and driven home. She did not resent the firing. She did not resent Eleanor. She simply moved on the way she moved through everything, with her whole attention on the next thing that needed doing. Harlan had not known about the firing until after the divorce was final. By then, months had passed. He did not reach out. Corinne did not expect him to. Whatever had happened in that kitchen existed in a space that neither of them could access through a phone call or a letter. So it remained where it was, undisturbed, like a room in a house that no one opens but no one empties. She was working now at a Marriott on the north side of Atlanta, cleaning rooms that other people passed through and forgot. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment near the bus line. It was small and orderly. The surfaces had the particular shine of a woman who believed that dignity lived in the details, even the ones nobody would see. She kept a small leather-bound notebook in her purse. She had carried one like it for decades. Inside she wrote the things that mattered about every household she served: birthdays, allergies, preferences, habits, the small facts of a life that most people do not think anyone notices. The section on Harlan Whittaker was detailed. She had not opened it in some time, but she had not removed it either. One evening, Harlan was driving south on I-85 coming from the office heading toward the house in Buckhead that was too large for one person and had been too large for one person for some time. He was in the left lane in his sleek black Lexus LS. The SUV crossed the median at speed. It came from the northbound lanes over the grass divider and into the southbound left lane where Harlan was traveling. The driver of the SUV was later determined to have suffered a cardiac event behind the wheel. He was dead before the vehicles made contact. The impact was head-on. The front of the Lexus folded inward in a way that made the car look like it was trying to close itself. Glass moved through the cabin. The airbag deployed and then deflated, its purpose spent in less than a second. The smell was rubber and heat and the particular chemical odor of a deployed airbag, which smells like nothing else and which everyone who has experienced it remembers. Harlan was unconscious. Fire and rescue arrived promptly. It took them some time to cut the driver's side door open and extract him from the vehicle. He was transported to Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta. The emergency team recorded the following: traumatic brain injury, fractured ribs, internal bruising, lacerations to the face and forearms. Glasgow Coma Scale score indicated serious condition upon arrival. Surgery lasted hours. He survived. Some days later, he opened his eyes. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at it the way a newborn looks at light, not recognizing it, but knowing it was important. A nurse asked him his name. He did not answer. She asked again. He looked at her with an expression that was not confusion exactly, but something closer to the blankness of a person standing in a house they have never entered, opening doors that lead to rooms they do not recognize. He did not know his name. He did not know he had children. He did not know about the commercial towers or the complexes or the empire or the letters on the building that could be seen from the highway. Among his personal effects, cut from the vehicle and placed in a labeled bag by the paramedics, were the following: a wallet containing bills folded into small neat rectangles, a phone with a cracked screen, a set of keys, and a single piece of paper found in the inside pocket of his jacket. The paper was a handwritten list. The handwriting was Harlan's. The contents of the list were not read by anyone at the hospital. They placed it in the bag with everything else and stored it in the closet of his room. He woke up in the most expensive room in the hospital and did not know his own name. A billionaire builder of a vast empire lay under white sheets with nothing inside his head but silence. For an extended period, no one came. Not his ex-wife, not his son who lived a short drive away, not his daughter who had been informed right away, not a single partner from the company that bore his name. The only person who came was a woman who had not worked for him in some time. She arrived one morning with a folding chair and a small container of food she had cooked in her own kitchen. She was his former housekeeper. She was not there for money. She was not there for a job. When a nurse asked her why she had come, she said only this: "He was kind to me once in a way that cost him something. I never forgot it." Harlan Whitaker was tall with hands that were too large for the suits he now wore and fingers that still carried calluses from a life of real work. The suits were meant to make people forget. They did not make Harlan forget. He had started young fixing other people's houses in Monroe, Georgia, for cash that he folded into small rectangles and kept in his left pocket, each bill facing the same direction. Because when you have very little, you learn to know exactly where every dollar is. The habit never left him years later, with substantial holdings in commercial real estate across the American South. Harlan Whitaker still folded his money into small rectangles and placed them in his wallet with the precision of a man who remembered what it felt like to have only one. Whitaker Development Group, numerous commercial towers, several mixed-use complexes under construction, a corporate headquarters in Midtown Atlanta with his name on the building in letters that could be read from the interstate, all built from nothing. Built by one person who had borrowed a modest sum to buy a condemned duplex on the south side of Monroe, gutted it with his own hands, rented both units, and used the rent to buy the next one. His voice in a boardroom was quiet, not soft quiet. The kind of quiet that makes a room lean forward, not because the speaker is uncertain, but because the speaker has no need to be loud. This was more unsettling than volume, and everyone who worked for him understood it. What the boardroom did not know, what the towers and the contracts and the letters on the interstate did not tell anyone, was the rest of it. He had been married to Eleanor for many years. They had divorced some time ago. The proceedings had been efficient and expensive and had left the kind of silence between two people that is worse than argument. The silence of people who have simply stopped finding each other necessary. He had two children, Brooks and Delaney, Both worked for Whitaker Development Group in positions that had been created for them rather than earned by them. Harlan knew this. He did not say it. He believed that time would do what conversation could not, that eventually they would grow into the roles the way he had grown into buildings by standing inside them long enough. He was wrong about this, but he did not know it yet, and the not knowing had become its own kind of patience. Late one night, Harlan had been sitting in his kitchen. The overhead light was off. Only the small light above the stove was on, the one that turned the kitchen into something smaller and quieter than it was during the day. Corinne Vale, who had been his housekeeper, had come downstairs for water and found him there. Something happened in that kitchen that Corinne never told anyone, and Harlan never acknowledged in daylight. It sat between them afterward, the way certain truths sit between people who understand that some things are honest for ordinary hours. Some time later, Eleanor filed for divorce, and in the machinery of separation, Corinne was let go. Corinne Vale had been born in a small southern town, the kind of place that people describe by what it does not have rather than what it does. She had no college degree. She had started cleaning houses young, and by the time she was established, she had become the kind of housekeeper who knew what a house needed before the house knew it itself. The creak that meant a hinge was going. The silence that meant a filter needed changing. The particular quality of dust that said a room had not been entered into long. Her husband Elias had died years before from lung cancer after a relatively short illness. She had been with him for every one of those months, sleeping in a chair beside his hospital bed until the nurses stopped asking her to go home and simply brought her a blanket each night. She had one son, Kieran, living in Houston. He called every Sunday. He always said, "Mama, come live with me." She always said, "I have things here." She never specified what the things were. Kieran had stopped asking. She had worked for the Whitaker household before she was let go. She had not been fired by Harlan. She had been fired by Eleanor, who in the weeks following the divorce filing had dismissed every member of the household staff in what appeared to be an act of eraser rather than economy. Corinne had received the call one day. She had thanked Eleanor for the years. She had packed her cleaning supplies into a plastic bin, placed it in the trunk of her car, and driven home. She did not resent the firing. She did not resent Eleanor. She simply moved on the way she moved through everything, with her whole attention on the next thing that needed doing. Harlan had not known about the firing until after the divorce was final. By then, months had passed. He did not reach out. Corinne did not expect him to. Whatever had happened in that kitchen existed in a space that neither of them could access through a phone call or a letter. So it remained where it was, undisturbed, like a room in a house that no one opens but no one empties. She was working now at a Marriott on the north side of Atlanta, cleaning rooms that other people passed through and forgot. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment near the bus line. It was small and orderly. The surfaces had the particular shine of a woman who believed that dignity lived in the details, even the ones nobody would see. She kept a small leather-bound notebook in her purse. She had carried one like it for decades. Inside she wrote the things that mattered about every household she served: birthdays, allergies, preferences, habits, the small facts of a life that most people do not think anyone notices. The section on Harlan Whitaker was detailed. She had not opened it in some time, but she had not removed it either. One evening, Harlan was driving south on I-85, coming from the office heading toward the house in Buckhead that was too large for one person, and had been too large for one person for some time. He was in the left lane in his sleek black Lexus LS. The SUV crossed the median at speed. It came from the northbound lanes over the grass divider and into the southbound left lane where Harlan was traveling. The driver of the SUV was later determined to have suffered a cardiac event behind the wheel. He was dead before the vehicles made contact. The impact was head-on. The front of the Lexus folded inward in a way that made the car look like it was trying to close itself. Glass moved through the cabin. The airbag deployed and then deflated, its purpose spent in less than a second. The smell was rubber and heat and the particular chemical odor of a deployed airbag, which smells like nothing else and which everyone who has experienced it remembers. Harlan was unconscious. Fire and rescue arrived promptly. It took them some time to cut the driver's side door open and extract him from the vehicle. He was transported to Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta. The emergency team recorded the following: traumatic brain injury, fractured ribs, internal bruising, lacerations to the face and forearms. Glasgow Coma Scale score indicated serious condition upon arrival. Surgery lasted hours. He survived. Some days later, he opened his eyes. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at it the way a newborn looks at light, not recognizing it, but knowing it was important. A nurse asked him his name. He did not answer. She asked again. He looked at her with an expression that was not confusion exactly, but something closer to the blankness of a person standing in a house they have never entered, opening doors that lead to rooms they do not recognize. He did not know his name. He did not know he had children. He did not know about the commercial towers or the complexes or the empire or the letters on the building that could be seen from the highway. Among his personal effects, cut from the vehicle and placed in a labeled bag by the paramedics, were the following: a wallet containing bills folded into small neat rectangles, a phone with a cracked screen, a set of keys, and a single piece of paper found in the inside pocket of his jacket. The paper was a handwritten list. The handwriting was Harlan's. The contents of the list were not read by anyone at the hospital. They placed it in the bag with everything else and stored it in the closet of his room. Brooks asked how long recovery would take. Dr. Holt said there is no timeline. Memory recovery after traumatic brain injury is not linear. It does not follow a schedule. It follows stimulation, familiar voices, familiar routines, familiar smells, and sounds and stories from the patient's life. The brain needs anchors. It needs repeated consistent exposure to people who knew the patient before the injury. That is the single most effective factor in recovery that we have documented. She said it depends on who shows up. Brooks looked at Delaney. Delaney looked at her phone. Victor Lang did not look at anyone. In the early days they came, both of them. They sat in the chairs beside Harlan's bed and spoke to each other about the things that concerned them, the trust structure, the board's interim appointment of a temporary CEO, the quarterly filings that needed a signature they could not currently obtain. They spoke about these things in Harlan's presence, near Harlan's body, in Harlan's room, but they did not speak to Harlan. Harlan sat in the bed and watched them. He did not understand the words they used. He did not understand the papers they brought. He understood something else, something that did not require memory to recognize. On one of those visits, after Brooks and Delaney had left, Harlan asked the nurse a question. He said, "Are those people my children?" The nurse said, "Yes." Harlan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They do not seem comfortable here. The nurse did not write this in the chart." She thought about it for the rest of her shift. As more days passed, Brooks began coming less often. His visits were shorter. He would stand at the foot of the bed, ask Dr. Holt for an update in the hallway, and leave. Delaney stopped coming altogether. She called the nurse's station instead. The calls were brief. She asked about legal competency assessments. She asked about timelines for guardianship proceedings. She rarely asked how he was feeling. When she did not wait for the full answer before asking her next question. One day, Brooks came for the last time. He brought a document. It was a medical power of attorney form. He placed it on the bedside table and explained to Harlan slowly, as though speaking to someone who did not understand English rather than someone who did not understand his own past, that this was a standard document, that it was for Harlan's protection, that it simply allowed Brooks to make decisions on his behalf while he recovered. Harlan looked at the document. He could not read it, not because the words were too complex, but because the words required a context he no longer had. He did not know what Whitaker Development Group was. He did not know what a trust was. He did not know why the man standing beside his bed was in such a hurry. But he could read the man, and what he read was a person trying to reach the end of something as quickly as the paperwork would allow. Harlan did not sign. He said, "I would like to wait." Brooks took the document and left. He did not come back. In the days that followed with no visitors, the room was large. It was on the 4th floor. It had a window that faced the parking lot and beyond it the tree line along the edge of the hospital campus. The light came in each morning, moved across the floor in a slow diagonal, and reached the far wall by noon. Harlan watched it every day. He did not know he was watching it. He simply sat in the chair by the window each morning, because the chair was there and the light was there and sitting in it felt like the thing to do. The room was very clean. The sheets were changed daily. The monitors beeped at intervals that had become familiar enough to disappear. There was a television mounted on the wall that Harlan never turned on. There was a phone on the bedside table that never rang. In the break room of a Marriott on the north side of Atlanta. Corinne Vale was eating lunch, a turkey sandwich on wheat bread, an apple, a bottle of water she refilled from the tap each morning because the vending machine charged for something that came free from the faucet. She had her phone open. She was not a woman who spent much time on her phone, but she read the news during lunch the way she did most things, methodically from the front page backward. The article was a small item. It gave his name. It gave the date. It gave the hospital. It did not give much else. Harlan Whitaker had never been the kind of wealthy man who appeared on magazine covers or spoke at conferences. He built things. He did not talk about building them. The article reflected that brief, factual, and already some time old by the time Corinne found it. She put the phone down. She looked at the sandwich. She did not pick it up again. She thought about the kitchen. She thought about late at night and the stove light and the man sitting at the table. She thought about what had happened that night. And then she did what she always did with that memory. She folded it back into the place where she kept it and moved on to the next thing. She reached into her purse and took out the leather notebook. She opened it to the section marked with a small tab she had cut from an index card some time ago. She read them the way a person reads something they already know by heart, but need to see in their own handwriting to believe. Allergies, none. Breakfast preference, scrambled eggs, no salt, toast cut diagonal. Coffee black, no sugar, served in a plain white ceramic mug with no pattern. Morning routine. Wake early. Sit in the kitchen before beginning the day. No conversation during those quiet minutes. She had learned the no conversation rule early on. She had never broken it. She closed the notebook. She finished her shift. She clocked out. She drove home to the one-bedroom apartment near the bus line. She changed out of her uniform. She went into the kitchen. She made scrambled eggs, no salt. She made toast and cut it diagonal. She placed both in a small container and sealed the lid. She set her alarm for early the next morning. She went to bed. She did not rush. She was the kind of woman who arrived at things the way weather arrives, not suddenly, but completely. The next morning, she drove to Grady Memorial Hospital. She parked in the visitor lot. She walked through the front entrance carrying the container in one hand and a folding chair in the other, because she had learned long ago that hospitals never had enough chairs in the right places. She went to the reception desk on the 4th floor. The woman behind the desk looked at her. Corinne was wearing a clean coat, not new, well-kept, comfortable shoes, the kind made for standing long hours on hard floors. She had the container of food in her right hand and the folding chair tucked under her left arm. "I am here to visit Harlan Whitaker," she said. The receptionist looked at the screen. She looked at Corinne. "Are you family?" "No," Corinne said. "I used to work for him. Only family members are permitted to visit patients in this unit." Corinne stood very still. She said, "Has any family visited him in the last while?" The receptionist looked at the screen again. There was a pause that answered the question before the receptionist could. Then the receptionist said, "Let me check with the attending nurse." Dr. Holt came to the reception area shortly after. She looked at Corinne. She looked at the food container. She looked at the folding chair. She said, "You worked for Mr. Whitaker." Corinne said, "I was his housekeeper." Dr. Holt said, "How well did you know him?" Corinne said, "I knew how he took his coffee. I knew the sound he made when he thought no one was listening. I knew which room he went to when he was sad. I knew what he ate for breakfast every morning for the years I worked there. I knew that he folded his money into small rectangles and that he did not like to be spoken to before he had his quiet time in the morning. I worked for him." Dr. Holt was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is more than his children have told me in all this time." She signed Corinne in. She walked her down the corridor. She opened the door. Harlan was sitting in the chair by the window. The morning light had just reached the armrest. He was looking at the parking lot the way he looked at most things now, with the quiet attention of a man who had nothing to compare anything to. He turned when the door opened. He looked at Corinne. He did not recognize her. His face did not change the way a face changes when it sees someone it knows. But it did not do what it had done when Brooks and Delaney walked in either. It did not go polite and distant and empty. Something else happened. Something smaller. His brow moved slightly. His head tilted just barely, the way a person tilts toward a sound they cannot quite place. He looked at her the way a person looks at a song they cannot name, but have heard before. Corinne did not introduce herself. She did not explain who she was. She did not say, "Do you remember me?" She set the folding chair beside the window. She sat down. She placed the food container on the bedside table. She opened it, scrambled eggs, no salt, toast cut diagonal. Harlan looked at the food. He looked at it for a long time. He did not know why, but something about the way it was arranged. The toast angle, the texture of the eggs, the absence of anything extra on the plate, made his hands relax on the armrests in a way they had not relaxed since he had woken up in this room. He picked up the fork. He ate slowly in silence. Corinne sat in her chair and looked out the window. She did not watch him eat. She did not ask if it was good. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight. And she was quiet the way she had been quiet in his kitchen in the early mornings. When the food was gone, she stood. She closed the container. She folded the napkin and placed it inside. She picked up the chair. She said, "I will come back tomorrow." She walked to the door. She opened it. She stepped through. Behind her, Harlan sat in the chair by the window. The light had moved to his knees. He looked at the empty container on the table. He looked at the door that had just closed. He pressed the call button. The nurse came. "Everything all right?" "The woman who was just here," Harlan said. Yes, she knew how I eat. It was the first sentence he had spoken in all that time. That was not a question. The nurse wrote it in the chart. She underlined it once. Then she went back to her station and sat quietly for a moment before moving on to the next room. On the next visit, Corinne brought coffee, black, no sugar, in a white ceramic mug with no pattern. She had found the mug at a thrift store. It was not the same mug, but it was the same kind, plain white, heavy enough to feel like it was holding something that mattered. She poured the coffee from a thermos she had carried in her bag. She set the mug on the bedside table. Harlan looked at it. He reached for it. His fingers closed around the handle and then moved to the body of the mug, wrapping around the ceramic the way hands wrap around something they have held before. He turned it once slowly. His fingers found the weight of it familiar, the way hands remember a doorknob in the dark. He drank. He did not say anything. Corinne sat in her chair by the window and was quiet. As the visits continued, she began talking. Not about his company, not about his net worth, not about the buildings or the contracts or the board. She talked about small things, things that lived in the notebook. She said, "You light the kitchen early in the morning when it was still dark. You never turned on the overhead light, just the one above the stove. You said once that the overhead light made the kitchen feel like a hospital. You wanted it to feel like a kitchen." Harlan listened. He was looking out the window while she spoke, at the parking lot, at the tree line beyond it. Then he turned his head slightly. He said, "I think I know that light." Corinne did not react. She did not lean forward. She did not say, "You remember." She simply nodded once and let the sentence sit where it was. On the table between them, the white mug held the last of the coffee gone cold. Dr. Holt stopped Corinne in the hallway before one visit. She said, "He is doing something with money, folding it into small rectangles. He does it with any piece of paper, napkins, the edge of his bed sheet. He does not seem to know why." Corinne said, "He has done that since I knew him." Dr. Holt said, "Procedural memory. The body remembers what the mind does not. The hands keep doing what they have always done even when the person cannot tell you why." She paused. She said, "In neuroscience we call this implicit memory. It lives in a different part of the brain than the memory of events. It is stored in the basal ganglia and the cerebellum, not the hippocampus, which means that a person who has lost every memory of who they are can still tie their shoes, still fold paper into the shape their fingers learned long ago, still feel safe in the presence of someone they cannot name. She looked at Corinne. She said, "What you are doing is not visiting. It is treatment. The brain needs anchors. You are giving him anchors." Corinne went into the room. Harlan was sitting in the chair. He had a bill in his hands. He was folding it slowly into a small, neat rectangle. He looked up at her and said, "I do not know why I do this." Corinne looked at his hands. Her own hands stopped on her knees for a moment. She said, "You have always done it since before I knew you." He looked at the rectangle of money. He placed it on the bedside table. He said, "It feels like counting, like making sure something is still there." Corinne said nothing. She opened the food container and set out his breakfast. On another visit, she brought music, not a song he had liked. She did not know what songs Harlan listened to when he was alone. She knew what song she had played on Saturday mornings when she cleaned the house, because she had played the same one every Saturday. A gospel track, old, the kind of song that is not about perfection, but about persistence. She played it from her phone, quiet, the speaker resting on the bedside table between the mug and the folded bill. Harlan listened, his head turned toward the sound, the way a plant turns toward light, not by decision, but by design. His eyes closed. When it finished, he opened his eyes. He said one word, "Saturday." Corinne nodded. She did not explain. She did not ask what he meant. She knew what he meant. She pressed play again, "Stay with me." Because what happened next in that hospital was not luck, and it was not coincidence. It was the sound of a person being rebuilt one small piece at a time by someone who had kept those pieces in a leather notebook without knowing she would ever need them again. Some time later, Brooks called the hospital. The call went to the 4th floor nurse's station. The nurse answered. Brooks asked about his father's condition. The nurse gave him the standard update: stable, cooperative, memory still absent, but cognitive function strong. Then she said, "His regular visitor is here right now if you would like me to pass along a message." Brooks said, "What regular visitor?" The nurse said, "Miss Vale, she has been coming every day." There was a silence on the line. Not a pause, a silence. The kind that comes when a person hears something they were not prepared for and needs a moment to rearrange the furniture in their mind before speaking. Brooks said, "Thank you." He hung up. Shortly after, Brooks and Delaney arrived at Grady Memorial together. They walked through the 4th floor corridor side by side with the pace of people who had somewhere specific to be and something specific to prevent. They turned the corner and found Corinne coming out of Harlan's room. She was carrying the empty food container in one hand. Her folding chair was under her arm. Brooks recognized her. He recognized her the way people recognized the help, quickly, categorically, and from above. Delaney spoke first. "What are you doing here?" Corinne said, "Visiting." Delaney said, "You do not work for us anymore. You were let go." Corinne looked at her. She said, "I was let go by your mother, not by your father. And I am not here for employment." Brooks stepped forward. He lowered his voice into something that was meant to sound reasonable. He said, "Look, we appreciate your concern. We do, but Dad is in a fragile state. He does not know who you are. He does not know who anyone is, and having an unauthorized person spending hours in his room every day is not something we are comfortable with. Dr. Holt appeared in the hallway behind them. She had been walking toward Harlan's room for a routine check. She stopped. She listened. She waited for Brooks to finish. Then she said, "Miss Vale is the only consistent presence your father has had in all this time. Her visits are not unauthorized. They are, from a medical standpoint, the only treatment that is currently producing measurable results. His verbal output has increased. His effect has shifted. He is engaging with stimuli in ways he was not engaging before she arrived. I approved her visits and I will continue to approve them. Delaney said she has no legal standing to be here. Dr. Holt said she has no legal standing. She also has no agenda. I cannot say the same for everyone in this hallway." The corridor was very quiet. Brooks looked at Delaney. Delaney looked at Victor Lang, who had materialized from somewhere behind them with his leather folder. Victor Lang said nothing. He had been a lawyer long enough to recognize a sentence that could not be answered without making things worse. Corinne stood where she was. She did not argue. She did not defend herself. She held the empty container and the folding chair, and she stood in the hallway with her back straight and her face calm. And she waited for the moment to pass the way she had waited for many such moments in her life. She had been told she did not belong in places before. She had learned a long time ago that the most effective answer was to keep standing where she was. She remained standing where she was. Brooks and Delaney went into Harlan's room. They stayed for a short while. When they came out, neither of them looked at Corinne. They walked to the elevator. The doors opened. They stepped inside. The doors closed. Corinne went home. She cooked the eggs. She cut the toast. She set her alarm. She came back the next morning and the morning after that and the morning after that. The following week, something shifted. Corinne did not bring food. She brought words. She sat in the chair beside the window and she began to tell Harlan Whitaker about Harlan Whitaker. Not the version his children knew, the buildings and the board and the net worth. The version she knew, the version that lived in the pages of her notebook and in the years of mourning she had spent in his house. She said, "You woke up early every morning. You sat in the kitchen with the stove light on. You never spoke during those quiet minutes. I learned not to speak either. I would start the coffee and we would both be quiet in the same room. It was the most peaceful minutes of my day." Harlan listened. He was sitting in the chair. His hands were on the armrests. He did not move. She said, "You had a way of saying thank you that most people did not notice. You did not say the words often. You said it by remembering. If I mentioned once that my son was applying to a program, you would ask how it went later. That was your thank you. Most people say thank you with their mouth. You said it with your attention." She said, "You kept every birthday card your children ever made you in a drawer in your study. Bottom left. The drawer was organized by year. You thought nobody knew about it. I dusted that drawer every week. I never opened the cards, but I dusted them and I always put them back in the same order." Harlan looked at her. He did not remember these things. Not the kitchen, not the drawer, not the cards, but something about the way she described them had a weight to it that was different from anything Brooks or Delaney had told him. They had told him about contracts. They had told him about the company structure. They had told him what he owned. Corinne was telling him who he was. And he could feel the difference, not as memory, but as something closer to recognition. The things she described did not come back to him as images or events. They came back as shapes. The shape of a man who woke up early because the quiet meant something. The shape of a man who said thank you by paying attention. The shape of a man who kept birthday cards in a drawer and thought no one knew. He said, "That sounds like someone I would want to be." Corinne looked at him. She said, "It is someone you were." He was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said, "Tell me more." She told him more. Down the hall in the staff conference room, Dr. Holt was conducting the weekly case review with her team. She had Harlan's file open on the table. She was explaining something to Dr. Brooks, a neurology resident who had been assigned to the case as a learning opportunity. She said there is a common misconception that identity is stored in episodic memory, that who you are is the sum of the events you remember. This is incorrect. Identity is distributed across multiple memory systems. Episodic memory, yes, but also emotional memory, which is stored in the amygdala, and procedural memory, which is stored in the basal ganglia and the cerebellum. A patient with severe retrograde amnesia who has lost all episodic memory can still retain a functional sense of self. She said this is why Mr. Whitaker folds paper into rectangles without knowing why. This is why his body relaxes when a certain person enters the room and tenses when another person enters. His amygdala is doing what it has always done. It is reading the emotional signature of the people around him and responding accordingly. He cannot tell you their names, but his body knows who is safe. Dr. Brooks said, "How do you measure that?" Dr. Holt said heart rate drops when his former housekeeper is in the room. Blood pressure normalizes. Verbal output increases. These are not opinions. They are numbers on the monitors. She said, in traumatic brain injury recovery, the medical literature is clear. The single most effective environmental factor in memory restoration is not medication. It is not surgery. It is the consistent, repeated presence of people who were part of the patient's daily life before the injury. Familiar voices activate dormant neural pathways. Familiar routines create scaffolding for the brain to rebuild connections. The brain does not simply retrieve lost memories. It reconstructs them, and it needs the original materials to do that. She looked at Dr. Brooks. She said, his children visit with lawyers. His former housekeeper visits with eggs. Tell me which one the brain recognizes as safe. Dr. Brooks did not answer. He did not need to. The monitors in the room were already answering every morning when the numbers shifted in ways that no medication in the hospital pharmacy could replicate. It was another visit. The room was quiet, not the quiet of absence, which had filled the room before she arrived, but the quiet of two people who had learned that silence between them was not empty. It was a different material entirely. It held. Corinne was sitting in her chair by the window. Harlan was in his chair beside the bed. The morning light had reached the middle of the floor. Neither of them was speaking. The coffee was finished. The food container was closed. Harlan said there was a kitchen. Corinne did not move. Harlan said the light was above the stove. It was late, not morning, very late. Corinne said, "Yes." Harlan said, "You were there." Corinne said, "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. His hands were on the armrests. His fingers were still. He said, "I was sitting at the table. The big light was off, just the one above the stove. And I was." He stopped. He looked at his hands. He said, I was crying. Karine said nothing. He said, not the way people cry when something happens. The way people cry when they realize something has been true for a long time and they have just now stopped pretending it is not. He paused. He said, I do not remember what was true, but I remember the crying and I remember you were there, late one night years before the accident, the kitchen in the house in Buckhead. The overhead light was off. The stove light was on, casting its small, warm circle on the counter and leaving the rest of the room in the kind of darkness that makes a large kitchen feel like a small, safe place. Harlan was sitting at the table. His hands were flat on the surface. He was crying, not loudly, not the way it happens in the moments after a shock. The way it happens when a man has held everything for so long that the holding itself has become the wound. And one night the wound simply opens on its own without permission, without warning. Eleanor had told him that morning that she wanted a divorce. He had nodded. He had gone to work. He had run a meeting. He had signed documents. He had driven home. He had eaten dinner alone because Eleanor had already moved to the guest room. And late at night, sitting in the kitchen with the stove light on, he had begun to cry. Not because he was losing his wife, because he realized he was not sad about losing his wife. Because the absence of sadness told him something about the years that was worse than any sadness could have been. He had been alone inside his own marriage for longer than he could name. And the truth of it, arriving all at once in a dark kitchen, was more than he could hold in his hands. Karine had come downstairs for water. She saw him. She stopped in the doorway. She did not say, "Are you okay?" She did not say, "What happened?" She did not say anything. She walked to the cabinet. She took out a glass. She filled it with water. She placed it in front of him on the table. Then she pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked at the stove light. She did not look at him. She sat with him. Neither of them spoke. At some point, the crying stopped. At some point, the water was drunk. At some point, the kitchen was just a kitchen again. To people sitting in it, one who had broken open and one who had not tried to put him back together, who had simply stayed while the breaking happened. Then Karine stood up. She took the glass. She washed it. She dried it. She put it back in the cabinet. She said, "Good night, Mr. Whittaker." She went upstairs. The next morning, neither of them mentioned it. Not that day, not the next, not ever. But starting the following month, Harlan placed extra money in Karine's pay envelope. No note, no explanation. Every month until Eleanor let her go and the envelope stopped in the hospital room, Harlan looked at Karine. He said, "You stayed." Karine said, "Yes." He said, "No one stays late at night for the help." Karine looked at him. She said, "You were not the help. You were a person in a kitchen who needed someone to sit with him." I was a person in a kitchen who knew how to sit. Harlan looked down at his hands. His fingers had found the edge of the hospital blanket. They were folding it slowly into a small, neat rectangle. He watched them do it. Karine watched them do it. And something passed between them that did not require memory to understand, because it had never been stored as a memory in the first place. It had been stored as something older and quieter. The knowledge that in the worst hour of his life, someone had sat across from him and not looked away. He said, "That night is the first thing I remembered. Not my name, not my company, not my children, that kitchen, that light, you." Karine was still. Her hands were in her lap. She said, "Some things the brain keeps closer than others." He said, "Yes, I think it does." Some days later, Brooks and Delaney returned. This time, they did not come alone. Victor Lang was with them, and beside him, a second attorney, a woman in a dark suit, whose name was Sylvia Grant and whose specialty, as Dr. Holt would later learn, was guardianship and conservatorship law. They requested a meeting with Dr. Holt in the consultation room. Brooks sat in the chair nearest the door. Delaney sat beside him. The two lawyers stood behind them. Brooks presented their request. 3 points. First, they wanted Harlan declared legally incapacitated. Second, they wanted emergency guardianship granted to Brooks as the eldest child. Third, they wanted all non-family visitors removed from the patient's access list. He used the word safeguard. He used it several times. Dr. Holt listened. She let him finish. Then she said, "Mr. Whitaker has retrograde amnesia. He has lost his long-term memory. He has not lost his capacity for judgment, reasoning, or decision-making. He can tell you what day it is. He can tell you what he ate for breakfast. He can follow a conversation, form an opinion, and express a preference. He cannot tell you what he had for breakfast years ago. He can tell you exactly what he wants for breakfast tomorrow. Those are not the same faculty," she said. "I will not certify him as incapacitated because he is not incapacitated, and the court will require my certification before any guardianship proceeding can move forward," Delaney said. "He does not know who we are. He does not know who she is. He is being manipulated by a woman who has no connection to this family and no right to be in that room. She is a former employee. She was terminated, and he has been spending hours every day alone with a man who cannot remember his own name. That is not treatment." From the doorway of the consultation room, a voice said, "I am in the room." Everyone turned. Harlan was standing in the doorway. He was wearing the hospital gown and the robe the nurses had given him. He was holding the four-pole with one hand. He had walked down the corridor by himself. His face was calm. His voice was quiet. The quiet that is more frightening than loudness. He said, "I do not remember your names. I do not remember her name, but I remember what I feel when each of you walks through that door." The room was very still. He said, "When you walk in, I feel like a problem to be solved. When she walks in, I feel like a person. That is not manipulation. That is the difference." He looked at Brooks. He looked at Delaney. He looked at the lawyers behind them. He said, "I would like you to leave. I would like her to stay. This is my decision. I am told I built something worth a great deal. If I built that, I can certainly decide who sits in my hospital room." Brooks opened his mouth. Harlan raised one hand, not commanding. "Just finished," he said. "Go home." They went. The lawyers went with them. The consultation room emptied. Dr. Holt stood in the hallway and watched them leave and said nothing because there was nothing medical to add to what had just happened. Corinne appeared from the corridor. She had been standing around the corner. She had heard everything. She walked to Harlan and took the four-pole from his hand and steadied it. She said, "You did not have to say it like that." Harlan said, "I may not remember them, but I know what I felt when they were here and I know what I feel when you are here. Those are facts. I do not need memory for facts." Corinne walked him back to his room. She sat him in the chair by the window. She gave him the white mug with the last of the coffee, now cold. He drank it anyway. She sat in her chair. They were quiet for a long time. The light moved across the floor the way it always did, slow and certain, reaching the far wall by noon. The memories came back the way weather changes. Not all at once, not on a schedule, in shifts, in pieces. Some mornings, Harlan would wake and know something he had not known the night before. Some weeks, nothing moved. He said to Corinne, "My name is Harlan." She said, "Yes." He said it again slowly, as if hearing it for the first time. Harlan Whitaker. He said it the way a person says a word in a foreign language they are just beginning to learn, carefully testing whether it fits in their mouth. He said there was a house, not here, smaller, a town with a factory. Corinne said, "Monroe." He said, "Monroe." "Yes, my parents worked there." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I remember the sound of the door when my father came home. I do not remember his face yet, but I remember the sound of the door." He looked at Corinne and said the amount he had borrowed for that first duplex. She waited. He said, "That was the first one, a duplex. I fixed it myself. The floor in the kitchen was so rotten I fell through it. I remember laughing, standing in the hall, laughing because what else was there to do?" He woke up and he knew their faces, Brooks, Delaney. He knew their names. He knew the way Brooks stood in a doorway slightly to the left, the way he had stood since he was young. He knew the way Delaney held her phone always in her right hand, always close to her body, as if it contained something she was protecting. He knew them, and knowing them was not the same as what he had felt before they had been strangers who made him feel like a problem. Now they were people he remembered, and the remembering did not erase what he had felt when he did not remember. It confirmed it. The memories returned not in the order they had been made, but in the order they mattered. The kitchen late at night came first. Then Brooks' college graduation, which Harlan had attended uninvited, standing in the last row of the auditorium because Brooks had not sent him a ticket, and Harlan had driven hours to be there anyway, and had left before the ceremony ended so that Brooks would not have to decide whether to acknowledge him. Then the day Delaney was born, and Harlan had held her in the delivery room and cried, and that had been the last time he cried for many years until the kitchen. The memories with the most feeling came back first, the ones that had cut the deepest grooves. He lay in the bed. Corinne sat beside him. He said, "I remember everything." Corinne said, "I know." He said, "I remember who they are, and I remember who you are, and I remember the difference." He was quiet. He said, "The difference was always there. I just did not say it out loud before." Corinne folded her hands. She said nothing. There was nothing to say to a man who had lost his entire life and gotten it back and discovered that the thing he had been most afraid to admit before the accident was the first thing his brain chose to remember after it. Harlan pressed the call button. The nurse came. He said, "My personal belongings. The bag from the car. Is it still here?" She brought it. The labeled plastic bag. He opened it. The wallet with the folded bills, the phone screen cracked, the keys and the piece of paper, the handwritten list. He unfolded it. He read it. Corinne watched his face. The list said, "Call Brooks. Birthday next week." Then Corinne Vale, check address. Then Foundation Housing for Healthcare Workers. He held the paper. He read it again. He read the second line a third time. Corinne Vale, check address. He had been looking for her before the accident, before the crash, before any of this. He had been trying to find her. He had written her name on a piece of paper and put it in his jacket pocket. And he had not gotten to the next step because the SUV crossed the median on I-85 one night, and the next step became impossible. He held the paper out to Corinne. She took it. She read it. She read her own name in his handwriting. She was very still. He said, "I was coming back to you. I just did not get there in time." Corinne looked at the paper. She looked at the name. She folded it carefully the way she folded everything, with precision and attention, and she placed it in the pocket of her coat. She said, "You got there. Harlan was discharged weeks after the accident. Dr. Holt signed the papers one morning." She told him that his memory had recovered substantially. Some gaps would remain, small ones, a name here, a date there. Rooms he had been in that he would never fully see again. She said that is normal. Brains are not filing cabinets. They are rivers. Some water returns to the same path. Some finds a new one. He thanked her. She said, "Do not thank me. Thank the woman with the eggs, asterisk." He met with Brooks first. The conversation took place in Harlan's office at Whitaker Development Group, the first time he had been in the building since the crash. Brooks sat across the desk. Harlan sat behind it. The conversation lasted some time. It was difficult. It was honest. It did not resolve everything, but it began. He met with Delaney the following week. That conversation was also difficult. It was also honest. It also did not resolve everything, but it also began. Harlan did not cut them off. He loved them. He was not certain they understood what that word required. He decided to teach them even if the lesson was late. He restructured the company. Brooks and Delaney were removed from the positions that had been created for them. They could return, but they would have to start at the beginning the way he had started. The way everyone who earns something has to start. He told Brooks, "I gave you everything I never had. I did not give you the thing that made everything possible, which was the experience of having nothing. That was my mistake. I am correcting it now." Brooks did not speak for a long time. Then he said, "That is going to be hard." Harlan said, "Yes, it is." Sometime after discharge, on a Saturday morning, Harlan drove to the west side of Atlanta. He parked on the street outside a small apartment building near the bus line. He walked up one flight of stairs. He knocked on the door. Corinne opened it. She was wearing a clean blouse and the comfortable shoes she always wore. The apartment behind her was small and orderly. One bedroom, a window that caught the morning light, a kitchen with a table, and two chairs that had never both been used at the same time until today. She did not say, "Come in," she simply stepped aside. He walked in. He looked at the kitchen. He looked at the window. He looked at the light coming through it, landing on the table in a warm rectangle that reminded him of something he could not fully name, but that his body recognized immediately. He sat down. Corinne went to the stove. She made scrambled eggs, no salt. She made toast, cut diagonal. She poured black coffee into a plain white ceramic mug with no pattern. She set it all on the table. She sat across from him. They did not speak. For those quiet minutes, they sat in the quiet of that kitchen the way they had always done before either of them knew the silence would matter this much. The light moved across the table. The coffee cooled. The eggs were good. When the quiet minutes had passed, Harlan said, "I would like to do something for the people who do what you do." Corinne said, "What do I do?" Harlan looked at her. He said, "You show up every day. You do the work nobody sees. And when someone breaks, you sit with them late at night and you do not leave, he said. I want to build something for those people, healthcare, housing. The things that the people who take care of everyone else never have enough of for themselves. Corinne looked at her hands on the table. She said, that is a lot. He said, it is not enough, but it is a start. He told her the name, the Veil Foundation. She looked at him. She said, you do not have to name it after me. He said, I want the name of someone who showed up. That is the whole point. She was quiet. She looked at the window. The light had moved past the table and was reaching the counter now. She said Elias would have liked that. It was the first time she had mentioned her husband's name to Harlan in all the years she had known him. It sat in the room the way good things sit in rooms, gently without needing to be discussed. Harlan reached into his pocket. He took out a piece of paper, a small one. He folded it slowly into a small, neat rectangle. He placed it on the table between them. Corinne looked at it. He looked at it. Neither of them said anything because some things do not need more words than the ones already in the room. Outside the window, Atlanta moved through its Saturday morning the way it always did. Cars and buses and people walking to places they needed to be. Inside the kitchen, the people sat at a table that had waited a long time for this. The eggs were finished. The coffee was cold. The light was everywhere. There is one question I want to leave you with. Not about the foundation. Not about the empire. Not about the memory or the crash or the hospital room. About the person in your life who showed up when no one else did. Who sat with you when sitting was all there was. Who remembered how you take your coffee when you had forgotten your own name. Write their name in the comments. Just the name, that is enough. That is everything. And if this story found something real in you, share it with someone who needs to hear that showing up is never small. Because somewhere out there, someone remembers how you take your coffee. And they are not finished yet. A quick note, this story is fiction. The characters and events are imagined. But the medical information about traumatic brain injury and memory recovery is real. Many Americans experience traumatic brain injury. The science around familiar presence and emotional memory is documented and ongoing. If someone you know is going through memory loss, your presence matters more than you think. I wrote this story because I believe we live in a world that measures people by what they own. But in the moments that matter, when the memory is gone, when the name is lost, when the room is empty, the people who matter are the ones who show up with scrambled eggs in silence. That is not a small thing. That is everything. See you in the next *.